have to travel, or they have illegal abortions within Poland. That's the scale of the problem, if you like, already before the new law came into place, because banning abortions, we know, doesn't make them go away, doesn't stop them. It just actually makes them more dangerous. And the decision by these 15 judges from the Law and Justice Party, it would leave that the only legal basis for abortions would be if someone was raped, if incest, or when the mother's life, as they call it, the woman's life, was at risk. And this would be a tiny fraction of cases. And so when you look at the response to this latest attack, I mean, this has been carrying on now week after week. This original judgment was made on the 22nd of October. You've got a sense it's absolutely phenomenal. At one stage, 100,000 marched in Warsaw. This is a city with less than 2 million people as a population. Many people travel to Warsaw for this. But it's not just in the big cities, it's right throughout. You know, estimates are something like 500,000 or more people have actually joined protests at some stage in this. And what's interesting is actually you've touched into layers that actually would have been people who voted for the government, for the ruling party, people who support it, and in some of the smaller places and smaller towns. And some research says that around 80% of the population is opposed to this new harsher law, and even 58% of Law Justice Party voters are against the new measures. And despite what has been an absolutely, I know we sometimes throw around the term brutal crackdown by police and so, but really what these protesters have faced from the police has been absolutely phenomenal. Tear gas and absolute violence. And let's not forget, the far right and fascists in Poland are also put out on the streets of a real and present danger to protesters. This isn't just, you know, a few nutters in the corner. This is something that actually, if you are out there marching, you know, there is a possibility that you will be attacked. And, you know, every year the far right and fascists march on, you know, Poland's Independence Day. And actually, you know, year after year, some of the pro-choice women have been at the forefront of taking on and challenging these. And I was at I watched the march a year ago in 2019, and you know, at one point activists dropped a banner which was in support of abortion rights, Roma rights, and LGBT rights from a house. And the similar thing happened in this year, but actually, you know, fascist thugs went up, ripped it down, beat people up, you know. And the previous year, pro-choice women had sat in front of the demonstration. I mean, incredibly courageous. And I suppose I wanted to just stress both how unprecedented the scale of protest is, but the situation there for this, and the sense that many people are loyal church goers, but even they have felt this is really, this is too far. And so far, you know, they've actually blocked the government going further with it, because what should have automatically happened would be the government would sign in this court's decision into the official journal, and this would make it law. But the government hasn't done this yet, this automatic thing. And so clearly it's created this limbo, because it's scared of going further forward, but obviously at the same time doesn't want to say, okay, game's up, we're not going to go ahead with this. And of course, this is now raising big constitutional questions legally. But not only that, the protests are now about something a lot, you know, I mean, women's rights is a big issue, and abortion is a big issue in Poland, but it's raising lots of other issues about the government, about the structure of society, and about what Poland is like. And when I said it reaches into some of the small places, I think it's got real echoes of what happened in Ireland, not the scale of the protests or anything, because in Ireland there was a referendum, but in the sense of showing how ideas have changed in society. And at one stage, farmers joined the women and supported women, and with a line of tractors did a road blockade in a small town, and with the slogan, "Fight the virus, not women." Now, when farmers come out for abortion rights, you really know that something is going on deep in the heart of society. And just as in Ireland, when they did have farmers for choice and farmers to repeal the 8th Amendment, the sense of actually the real life that people lead, who every family will know of somebody perhaps who's had to have an illegal abortion, who's had to travel to the Czech Republic or elsewhere, you know, the sense of actually something that was buried and stigmatized, which it still is, but buried and secret and just a woman's individual problem, has become something that more and more, and this is the impact also of wider struggles in the world about it. And I think it's both full of potential, and you know, the slogans of "fuck you" and "fuck the government," but also we want a revolution. I mean, this is on people's homemade placards. You know, we don't just want women's rights; we want a revolution. And the government are genuine. You get the mainstream bourgeois press talking about the fact that the government's worried that what they've actually done is provoked something bigger than that they can deal with. So, you know, massive potential. The fight is far from over. I mean, just to point out that some hospitals, as soon as the Constitutional Court made the decision, some hospitals started refusing women abortions, even under the terms that hadn't actually gone into law yet. Even women who had appointments to come in. And let's remember, we're talking about women who are probably having very much wanted pregnancies, that something's gone wrong and they've had to go in for what is a legal abortion. And actually the women's rights and reproductive rights organizations had to put enormous pressure on hospitals in Warsaw and elsewhere to say, no, the law hasn't changed yet. Even on this minimal, you've got to do, and they did get a U-turn on that. So this is far from over in Poland. But as the title of the meeting says, it's not just in Poland that abortion has become center stage. And I want to just say a few words about America, because really the right, the national federal sort of right enshrined in a legal precedent since 1973 to have access to the right to abortion is in danger. I mean, this is the reality. Trump may not have won. Well, he hasn't won the next election, but actually, in his time in office, he delivered on his promise, which was to create a majority in the Supreme Court against abortion. He was able to nominate just by the luck of what happened, 3 Supreme Court judges. One of them, they wouldn't allow Obama to appoint in a year or more before he finished. And he obviously rushed through the final anti-abortion judge just before the election. But you have a situation now, he'll have gone in January. But because of the Supreme Court judges sit on it until they die, he has left a legacy decades after he finishes that is in danger of overturning the Roe versus Wade, the court decision that enshrines the right to abortion. And also, it isn't just enshrined in law. Trump, you know, look at the vote he got. Over 73 million people voted for Trump. This is not something that goes away. This is not Trump gave confidence to the far right and populist right parties and anti-abortion movements and organizations across the globe. That's what his victory as president did. That doesn't just disappear. That confidence that he's given, and I think we'd be complacent and dangerous if we just said he's no longer the president, that danger goes away. In actual fact, you know, he has mobilized people who've now got a sense of righteousness and a sense of they've got an ability to shape things, and therefore the danger hasn't gone away. And also what happens in America is something that happens in lots of places too, but because they couldn't change the law to have a right to abortion, what many states who've got anti-abortion governors and majorities is they try to control access. And so at the moment, 5 states in America have only got 1 abortion clinic in the whole of the state. 25 states require you to wait for at least 24 hours between you first going in to ask for an abortion and to access your legal right and actually doing the procedure. And 12 of these states have laws which effectively mean that you have to go away and come back and make a second trip. If you're in a state like Mississippi with only 1 abortion clinic and you're told to wait for 48 hours, you can't travel hundreds of miles back to your home. You sleep in the car. Or reproductive rights clinics and other supportive groups maybe offer you a sofa to sleep on overnight. If you've got children, if you're in an abusive relationship and you're trying to do this in secret, you just begin to imagine what the reality of even the situation at the moment where it's still, the federal law still supports it. It's actually very, very difficult. All of this was before COVID-19, these conditions. And actually in many states, 11 states completely stopped all abortion services in the spring on the basis that it wasn't a necessary medical procedure, that it wasn't necessary. And therefore you had a situation where women in these states in the middle of what is the pandemic is raging in the US, where they would try to raise money to fly to a state that could provide them an abortion within the legal limit times. And so an absolute nightmare for people within what is continuing to be an emergency situation in America, and where doctors are genuinely concerned that they will have to turn women away because the places that are still providing are being overwhelmed by people being flown in and traveling in from places that can't get access. On top of that, there is a constant stream. I mean, I can hardly keep up with it sometimes. There's always new ones of legal cases, which sometimes are making outrageous demands on the local states in terms of how they can control abortion access, but on the basis that they'll get overturned and they can be appealed, and on the basis that one of them might get to the Supreme Court, and then that be the possibility for the new majority to overturn the law. So there's all that domestically in America. But Trump's presidency has also had an absolutely deadly impact on reproductive rights across the world with its global gag rule. Now, people are probably here at this meeting familiar with it. What it is Republican presidents have done it before, where that anybody who offers abortion services will not get any international aid from America to provide that. Trump went further. He said you won't get aid for anything you do if even $1 of your money is spent on giving abortion services advice or supporting that's abortion care. And so therefore you have seen millions of international aid being denied to organizations because one part of their organization that raises money independently to offer such services can't get access. And there's all sorts of estimates as to what impact this has had, that perhaps 2 million women globally will go without access to proper services, that perhaps a couple of million unintended pregnancies, and certainly thousands of maternal deaths as a result of Trump's very special extended global gag. So that's the global impact just of Trump. A few words then about South and Central America, because I think in Latin America, you are seeing something, I mean, again, because there's been such big issues dominating the news around the pandemic, etc. There's things going on that are really interesting, because actually, you know, many Latin American countries ban abortion outright or only allowed in very specific circumstances. In El Salvador, some women who've had abortions have had jail sentences of several decades given to them. This is how severe it can be. And most of the countries, including Brazil, allow abortion only in very, very specific circumstances, such as rape or the health risk to the woman. Only in Uruguay and Cuba, elective abortions are allowed. But the challenge of this situation is growing. The new Argentine president proposed legislation to act for abortion rights last month. Chilean activists are aiming to write reproductive rights into a new constitution. And in Mexico, new lawmakers, mainly led by women, are resisting abortion bans and looking to change the law on access. So you're looking at a situation where the right to access abortion has turned into something that is a central political issue in struggles that are happening across the globe. A few words on Britain, though, and I think this is something that's important for us to look at the differences, but also why there is still a struggle to go on here. Because it's legal, you can access legal abortions in Britain, and as I mentioned earlier, about 200,000 a year take place. And this is on the basis of an act that was passed in 1967, which allowed, under certain circumstances, women to access legal abortion. It had an incredible impact. Doctors say that within months, you know, you saw a big difference in terms of deaths of women. You saw a difference in terms of emergency wards in big cities like London, where working class women would come and present, you know, having had an illegal backstreet abortion on Friday nights with their wage packet or on Saturday mornings. And therefore the A&Es, the casualty departments, would have been filled with those women. And this stopped with the 1967 Act. It's absolutely phenomenal. But it was already flawed when it was passed, but actually today it is so out of date. It has really created exceptions to the 1861 Act, which is offences against the person. This is an act, really, you know, can you imagine that women are accessing reproductive rights in 2020 under an act that was passed in 1861? And so what pro-choice activists are demanding now, and what we, you know, as socialists have demanded for some time, is for it to be completely removed from criminal law. Criminal law has no place in a medical procedure in women accessing healthcare. And that's why we, you know, call for decriminalization. And, you know, look at it. And I write about this in depth in my book. You know, abortion is common. It's a part of every human society. And even when it is risking to life, women have accessed it in order to control their fertility, or to control the size of their families, or to have no children at all. And I think that when we look at it, what's happened in Britain, that the law only allowed it in these particular circumstances, but actually, funny enough, things, because of the pandemic, have actually forced some change, have forced the fact of the women being allowed to take, I mean, the vast majority of abortions in Britain are basically taking 2 pills before 13 weeks or before 12 weeks. That's what it is now. We're not talking about a medical procedure as an operation, except in the very tiny minority of women. And therefore now, because of COVID, in most cases, women are allowed temporarily, and we're hoping that we'll to make this permanent, to be able to take these pills at home. But there is specific conditions that were created in order to placate the anti-abortionists. And another one was that 2 doctors have got to consent to this. And that's still the case. Now, there is no other medical procedure where 2 doctors have got to consent to do something to help somebody. And remember, actually, when you go in to have an operation done or have any sort of medical procedure, it's usually you giving the consent to the doctor, not the other way around. You know, you don't have to ask the doctors for consent to remove, you know, your appendix or anything else. So actually, this shows that abortion is treated as something utterly different to anything else, any other sort of medical health care. And I'm arguing that it should, this should change. But of course, the big question is, why is this? Why is it so special? Why do we have to have 2 doctors signing for? Why is it only supposedly allowed in certain circumstances, on certain premises, etc., etc.? And of course, we have to go back. It's absolutely rooted in the role that women are expected to play in society. And the institution of the family is utterly central to this process. Now, it goes without saying, the family is a very contradictory thing, a very contradictory institution. I mean, it plays this economic and ideological role. The economic role is clear, you know, carries a huge burden of society. And I mean, we see it, you know, it's writ large, really, hasn't it been, through lockdowns and everything else, the idea that what the family carries in an economic way and in an ideological way. This is where I think it's very important as well, because actually the role that women are seen to play, or expected to, or told they should play, it lays out what's natural for us, what's seen as our biological role, our destiny, if you like, the thing we're best at, the thing that's natural for us. And therefore, whatever else we do, the vast majority of adult women work full-time and work throughout their adult life, etc., etc. This is always seen as secondary, isn't it? And therefore, anything that we see that being a mother is really being the child bearer and carer is seen as being our central role. And so, you know, when some woman takes on some high-powered job, it's like, and she's got children now, what about the children? You know, now men don't get asked this, you know, and this is something that's quite specific. And I think that therefore we've got a sense where abortion has been historically seen in the last, you know, 150, 200 years as being something that's an aberration for women of their natural role. That's part of the reason why there is such stigma bound up with it, because it's rejecting what should be something that we always want to be, a mother, and it doesn't matter how many and when. This is the natural thing our bodies are aimed for. And I think therefore, even where it's legal, like in Britain, there is still profound sense sometimes of shame still even associated with abortion. And I find this as I've done meetings around the country in the years, over the years, and actually people talk about that they've never talked about it at work, and you know, this sort of thing, until it comes up as an issue in the news, you know, and then find out how many people want to talk about it because everybody knows somebody who's had to have one. And actually what was brilliant about the Repeal the 8th Amendment campaign in Ireland, it actually put it on the agenda, and also put it on the agenda in a way that was about, it's a positive thing. It's something that everybody, it's a progressive cause that everybody should just sign up to automatically. And I think that was something that has really helped as well. But I think I also want to make a point that when we talk about abortion rights, and as socialists, we talk about being pro-choice. Now, what does pro-choice really mean? It isn't just about the right to choose an abortion. It's also about the right to choose to have children and to be able to bring up children and have the ability and support to do that, because women are vilified and punished, not just for ending an unwanted pregnancy, but sometimes for wanting to have children or bring up children in a situation that society or the ruling class or the establishment disapprove of. And so we have a history in Britain of forced adoptions, and in Ireland in particular. But this isn't just Ireland. It happened in Presbyterian and Protestant church as well as Catholic churches in Britain as well. The Magdalene laundries were not just in Ireland, but these were places where unmarried mothers, and I always say, you know, there's no such thing as an unmarried father. Simply not a thing. It's not a phrase anybody ever uses. It was the mothers who were, the women who were punished, were forced into institutions because of the shame of not being married and having sex before marriage. And in many cases, and particularly this was very much so in Ireland, where the shame of being an unmarried mother was the greatest in terms of the control that the Catholic Church had there. And actually, in many cases, their babies were taken away from them. And we know that many of them were sold to richer parents, often in America. If anybody has seen the film Philomena, they will see a real life story. I mean, if you haven't seen it, it's absolutely terrific film. And Philomena, the real Philomena, gives talks still today about the situation. And the state was absolutely complicit in this. This isn't just about the church going off and having some sort of dreadful role on its own. Absolutely knitted in the Irish state, where during the 50s, 10 babies a month were being fast-tracked through passports, getting their own passports in order to be sold to, I think my internet's gone a little unstable, I'll carry on, to be sold to rich American couples, often with no paperwork, therefore people cannot find their real families or their biological parents, or the parents can't find their children even today. This is about policing women's bodies, policing their fertility, and I think, and their sexuality, and it's part of the bigger picture of women's oppression and class rule in society. And one of the reasons why I say it's part of the bigger picture, because also we've seen in terms of how racism is used to police Black women's bodies as well, and migrant women, in a way that really shows that these things feed into every aspect of this. In America, and I write about this in my first book on women's liberation, as well as the more recent one, is actually there was a situation during the 50s and the 60s where Black women ended, if they were in hospital for a cyst or something else, would find themselves without their knowledge or consent being sterilized, because actually this was about eugenics. This was about stopping the Black population growing. And actually, it's absolutely chilling today to read that some migrant women in the camps that are around the border with Mexico are finding themselves being told they might be able to get themselves a residency or a right to live in America if they agree to be sterilized. This is a situation that we can see how policing women's bodies leads to the state playing this sort of role. So back to Britain, you see, when I talk about those are the roots of it, those are the reasons that abortion is different and why people are treated especially. It isn't just that these ideological attacks on women who have children in situations the ruling class doesn't want happen elsewhere. They happen here too. As it happens, working class women were also encouraged to be sterilized back in the 1950s. But today they play it slightly differently. In Britain, if you're poor, there's not just ideological attacks on that you're feckless and everything else. This has gone on, hasn't it, under the Tory government. The Tories punish your children if you have more children than they think is appropriate. Rees-Mogg has 6 kids, nobody cares about that. But if you depend on welfare benefits and you have more than 2 children, you do not get child tax credits for the children above 2. You are punished for having more children than they think is your right. And actually, new research just out in the last week shows that of women who came to BPAS, which is does many of the abortions for the NHS, 57% of people affected by this sort of welfare cap said that it informed their decision to have an abortion because they couldn't afford to have another child. Not that it was an unwanted pregnancy because they didn't want one, but because of the economic impact of them not getting child tax credits and not being able to access the benefits. Tens of thousands of families have had their benefits removed under this ruling. And the fiscal studies, the Institute for Fiscal Studies estimates that this 2-child limit has tipped this is an extra 300,000 children into poverty. And you only have to listen to the news every night. You only have to see the food banks. You only have to see the impact the pandemic has had on many of the poorest people in Britain to know that this is has had an even more severe impact. So this is about policing working class people, working class families, and working class women, and saying, you know, you have to take control. And in what was described as a concession, this was a chilling thing, that you are told that you'll be exempt from this if you can show the third child or more was conceived through rape. And up to 900 women have been forced to disclose their experience of rape to benefit officials in order to retain their benefits. Now, I find that utterly disgusting that somebody would have to do this. And I think it just shows the utter hypocrisy of the ruling class and the Tories, who revere the family. You know, Rishi Sunak talked about it in his financial statement the other week, you know, revere the family, but their policies wreck any chance of working class family having lives. I'm going to sum up now, because I want to say that even though families look very different than they did 20, 30, 100 years ago, the ideology is still important to police us. And therefore, it's to police us to say self-reliance has to replace social responsibility, that you should look after your children, not the state. And actually, these cruel laws ensure that working class families, and for that often working class women, carry the greatest burden of bringing up the next generation. And therefore, that's why we always say reproductive rights, that's why socialists say reproductive rights is a class issue. It's an issue for trade unionists and socialists. The biggest abortion rights demonstration that ever happened in Britain was organised by the TUC. Many unions that only had male members, miners and the like, marched on that demonstration. I was on it 1979, the autumn. It was utterly inspiring. And that's why many of them remembered, you know, this was only just over a decade after their wives and sisters and daughters would have ended up being in that A&E on a Friday night, having gone to backstreet abortionists. So we are now in a moment. We're in a moment where women's rights in general, with the Me Too movement and all the rest of it, are actually center stage. And as part of that, women's reproductive rights have become a central political issue of the day across the globe. And therefore, this is why we as socialists always say controlling our bodies, controlling our fertility is fundamental to our ability to even be part of the struggle. Part of the struggle to change things, part of the struggle to build a new society. And that's why they're absolutely central to any part of the fight for our general big fight for women's liberation. I'll leave it there.